President and CEO of Potomac Core, Dan Varroney. Dan is going to speak about, looks like his new book here, Reimagining Industry Growth, Strategic Partnership Strategies in the Era of Uncertainty. Sounds like great advice, and we look forward to hearing from Dan this afternoon. Dan, let me hand it off to you. Thank you for joining us.
Glenn, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you and everyone who is attending the conference today. It's actually an honor. I am going to share my screen with you. Well, I'm going to start off talking a little bit about my book. But as I talk about my book, what I want to say is that I was motivated to write this book because what I saw was a window of opportunity that was perfect for a call to action, whether it be for entrepreneurs, for executives, for trade association leaders, and every industry throughout the United States. I saw this as an absolutely excellent time for this call to action and write this book. But as I thought about the circumstances and the situation around the economy, here's what I was struck by. There were two significant economic events, one in the 2008-2009 window, the other in the 2020 window. Both of these disruptions, these dual disruptions, literally transformed, changed the global market and the way C-suite executives would think. So when we think about that 2002, 2008, 2009 window, clearly the economic meltdown, businesses were absolutely compelled to reevaluate their strategic approaches. Where industries and companies were thinking in a strategic manner and strategic planning, it became more of a scenario planning event. Why? Because we need to be prepared for whatever happens next. So it was more over the horizon potentialities and be thinking of new and innovative ways to move forward. And that was probably the right way to look at things, because in 2020, really the bottom did fall out with COVID-19. It created all kinds of fear. The loss of life was horrendous around the world. Many people lost their jobs, wages were lost, pay was cut. The markets went into a tailspin, and truth be told, the world is still reeling. When you look at things like the Great Resignation, why are people going, even why are people staying in work? People don't know what's going to happen next. So here's where we are today, the dual disruptions that forever influence and change thinking in the C-suite. What was interesting as I researched the book, as I talked to a number of different industry executives in different industries, this whole notion that strategic partnerships between companies weren't anything new, but they did in fact offer a lot of new and different opportunities to not only leverage assets, but really mitigate risk and drive revenue growth. But as I looked at strategic partnerships amongst companies, there was something that was particularly interesting to me, and I wanted to share this with you. And it was as follows. It included this outside-in approach, right? So in other words, instead of companies focusing internally, companies that went into strategic partnerships were more customer-centric. It was customer preeminence. Everything they thought, everything they did started with the customer, not with the business or the company. So when they looked to build these strategic partnerships, they wanted to make sure that the other companies they went into partnership with shared the same focus. What's more, they wanted to make sure that their strategic partner understood the business environment and acted decisively, in addition to having that outside-in approach. And then equally as important, the importance of the relationship between the companies, that there would be no substitute, because inside this partnership, they were going to have to navigate rough challenges. Now, inside these company strategic partnerships, clearly there was strategic thinking. What was especially striking to me as I looked at different corporate strategic partnerships was the degree of business acumen that was necessary in order for these partnerships to be formed. In addition, this, what I would call hyper focus on data and analytics, to understand every aspect of the business, every trend engaged in the business. There were outcomes that measured effectiveness. There were key performance indicators as part of these partnerships, and the element that drove these successful strategic partnerships were constructive governance, leadership, and processes that both sides agreed to before both companies moved forward. What I want to share with you, however, are two visible strategic partnerships that really struck me as I started to write my book. And that was the partnership between Starbucks and Barnes and Noble. Look at it this way. Starbucks, a highly visible and dominant brand. And when you look at the bookstore space, well, so is Barnes and Noble. But when you look at what the partnership could achieve together, it was as follows. They shared the same values, they had the same customer-centric approach, on and on. But when you look at Starbucks, Starbucks got an entree into market they weren't in the bookstore market. Most importantly, when you're walking now into a Barnes and Noble bookstore, you could smell the fresh pastries, you could smell the coffee, and you could be part of that same Starbucks experience. Starbucks thrives because of the experience that it builds. That third place between work and home has been extended from the Starbucks store all the way to the Barnes and Noble cafe. And most importantly, what both companies achieved was access to markets they didn't have. As a result, they were able to grow their top lines. Looking again at Starbucks, but this time Starbucks and PepsiCo, think about the ability of creating the Frappuccino, and with that Frappuccino, having a vast distribution network, again, getting into markets you currently are not in, sharing the same values, having the same customer-centric approaches, having clear key performance metrics and indicators. This partnership also thriving. In 2016, this partnership generating $2 billion plus in the retail business. Very, very impressive. Now, what I found is especially interesting, though, we now looked at it from a company perspective, but what I also found is that industry executives were utilizing a different application of these partnerships, one that is particularly more inclusive, even more impactful, far more ambitious, and actually the type of strategic partnership that moves the needle for entire industries. Now, these are industry and trade association strategic partnerships. These are actually functional, highly functional relationships that align in a pre-competitive space. So when I say pre-competitive space, I'm talking about issues that affect and impact the external business environment. It can be tax policy, can be employment, can be regulations. Pre-competitive spaces where these functional relationships are formed. So think of an industry that could be the baking industry and their industry trade association, the American Bakers Association. In every case that I wrote about in my book, each of these strategic partnerships leveraged the trade association relationship and had it function as a strategic business unit as the industry. Instead of having association strategic planning processes, they had strategic industry planning processes where they literally brainstormed go forward strategies. What does the external business environment look like today, tomorrow, 2 months, 2 years, 5 years from now? And then how do we build institutional frameworks to give us the leverage that we need to shape the external environment? Within those within those institutional frameworks, there were either companies from their entire value chain or their entire supply chain. They built these institutional frameworks to have more leverage, to better shape a more favorable external environment. Through these relationships, they were absolutely effectively able to overcome industry challenges, And most importantly, in each of the 5 case studies that I wrote about in my book, each of these industries were able to position for long-term growth, and they were far more durable as a result. I want to give you a sense, however, of something that I found particularly interesting. So within these strategic partnerships, the industry executives looked to build partnerships with trade associations that shared their approaches, absolutely shared their approaches. They included things like brand personalities. They were highly capable of strategic collaboration. They understood this notion of promotion and how to leverage every market channel. They understood how to take data and analytics and to drive data-driven insights. They understood that regardless of the market conditions, they were able to deliver results. And they had informed biases for action. So as we think about these strategic partnerships, what compelled these industry executives to build these partnerships were the similarities in traits and characteristics between themselves and the trade association CEOs. The 5 industries that I looked at and I wrote extensive case studies on were not just small table stakes. These were substantial presence especially in the US economy. So it was the recreational boating industry and their trade association, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, a US footprint annually of $170 billion. The baking industry and the American Bakers Association, an industry that contributes $154 billion to the US economy in 2020. Unmanned systems and the Association for Unmanned Vehicles. They operate in 3 specific domains, in particularly aircraft, ground, and maritime. But please take a moment and look at the dollar footprint. The asphalt pavement industry and the National Asphalt Pavement Association, with a $25 billion footprint, and the frozen foods industry and the American Frozen Foods Institute, with almost a $300 billion global footprint in 2019. These were 5 industry sector-specific case studies inside my book. Just for a moment, we're going to take a look at the recreational boating industry. What was interesting in their CEO is that he had a strategic philosophy that said that our association is the industry. We don't exist apart from the industry. His strategic approach was that if any part of their ecosystem was being attacked or hurt, that it would eventually hurt the entire industry. He utilized that ecosystem approach as a rallying cry to totally motivate the entire supply chain. As a result, everybody bought into the ecosystem concept to the point that it wasn't the associations, it belonged to the entire ecosystem, and it worked perfectly. What I want to share with you is something absolutely fascinating, that as I looked especially closely at the recreational boating industry and their ecosystem, they were part of an outdoor recreation roundtable. I want you to think of every industry segment in outdoor recreation, from natural resources all the way to logistics and delivery in outdoor recreation. It created a web of interlocking partnership. They leveraged it to make outdoor recreation relevant to the entire economy. What was especially impressive is that through all of their ecosystem and the trade associations in the ecosystem, led by the National Marine Manufacturers Association, they were recognized by the Bureau of Economic Analysis as a vital contributor to gross domestic product. Let me pause and underline how significant this is. When you're looking to shape the external environment and influence regulations and legislation, you need to have standing. Outdoor recreation represents 2.1% of US gross domestic product. that's absolutely phenomenal. It gave the outdoor recreation industry the leverage it needed to shape and influence the external environment. Just for a moment, let me share with you what this institutional framework looks like. Outdoor sports, outdoor recreation, recreational vehicles, hiking and camping, and recreational boating. If you look through the list and you look at everyone from retailers to suppliers to manufacturers, this is a very impressive ecosystem. And then think back, it all represents 2.1% of US gross domestic product. Now, let me give you an example of the kind of impact and leverage that this industry trade association had. We are the industry and we don't exist apart. But think of an industry that has a trade show, but a trade show, again, focused on who? On the outside in, on the customer and the customer's customer. So the members of the association are the boat makers and the boat sellers. Through the Miami Boat Show, they sell $500 million worth of industry products through this show. In 2016, the Miami Convention Center closed. So think of 40 to 50% of annual sales achieved at this show, and it was going to close. As a result, the National Marine Manufacturers Association did enormous due diligence. With the approval of the industry, invested up to $16 million to get the show located. Now, the reason why they did that is a number of companies would have gone out of business. NMMA, as a strategic partner trade association, understood the importance of helping its members achieve $500 million worth of revenue, spent down its reserve to move to the Miami Marine Stadium to make sure that the industry could effectively continue to generate its revenue. Another example in this case study of driving industry growth, we all remember when the economy was shut down in 2020. Actually, we remember it vividly. We couldn't go anywhere or do anything. But what we did know from the Centers for Disease Control is we could go outside. The industry strategic partner, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, partnered with another organization called the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, and they collaborated on a campaign they called Take Me Fishing. It was a promotional campaign. They marketed it to anxious consumers that wanted to break free, to get outside and enjoy the great outdoors. This campaign was immensely successful. It helped the industry achieve, from 2019 to 2020, 20% year-over-year increase in revenue. The industry observed after the fact that their unit sales exceeded 300,000. The last time they reached that was 2007. They thought they would never, ever again reach that volume of unit sales, and they did as a result of this joint partner effort through the Take Me Fishing promotional campaign. So when I talk about industry and strategic partnerships, they align in a pre-competitive space. They're effective. In all 5 of these case studies, the industries really rarely missed a beat as a result of these partnerships. The ecosystems that they had provided the range and the reach they needed to innovate, to become efficient as an industry, and make effective cases to regulators in order to keep moving their industry forward. We're in a period of chronic uncertainty. This is an approach worth pursuing. It's an approach worthy of immediate exploration for everyone. This is applicable to entrepreneurs, to early stage funders. Anyone can take this ecosystem approach and apply it across the board. Now, my book is available at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and Wiley. Anyone who purchases the book today will be eligible for a 1-hour free webinar, and companies who purchase 50 or more books today will receive an in-depth 2-hour seminar. So now, in order to qualify, individuals and firms will need to forward your purchase receipts to team at Potomac. Once I receive those receipts, I'll schedule those webinars. My contact information is here. It's Dan at Potomac Core, team at potomaccore.com. This is my phone contact. You can find me on LinkedIn, either at Daniel A. Varroney or at Potomac Core.